Gets us.
Right. It says it's recording.
I've never even watched them. I think it goes like.
Oh, it does, that does video too?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Tracks noise, so the hard parts is noise. That's the opening. Pop.
So to follow the noise and the camera.
Yeah, I expect. Yeah. You look good.
Hello, everyone. I would like to call to order the regular meeting of the Board of Park Commissioners of the Wilmette Park District for Monday, November 10th, 2025 at 6:31 p.m. Could we have a roll call, please?
Right, 17th.
17th.
Oh, it says 10. 17.
17th, sorry.
17. Thank you.
Commissioner Duffy. Present. Commissioner Clark.
Here.
Commissioner Vogel.
Here.
Commissioner Murdoch. Here. Commissioner Adrian Oakley.
Here.
Commissioner Leahy. Here. Commissioner Frady.
Here.
Yep.
All right. First order of business is communications and correspondence, which we have in the packet. Are there any others that anyone would like to record?
Yes, Karen Glennemeyer sent us an email a week ago, and it really should have been in the packet, and it will be in the next packet. I'm sorry.
That was a very nice email, about that. I mean, it was about
Email.
and I'm really sorry it took so long for, I'm just curious to what the issue was. And
So Commissioner Clark is referencing an email in the packet regarding, I believe, lighting at Howard Park, which was resolved swiftly thanks to Executive Director Lindgren. So thank you. All right, moving on to 3.0 public comment and recognition of visitors. We do have some I see on here 5 names. May I see a show of hands of who would like to speak tonight? Okay, great. With that being said, if you plan to address the board tonight, we ask that you please come up, not to the podium, just stand in your place if you wouldn't mind, and speaking to the microphone, not that either, but maybe just close enough that we can pick up your sound. We are trying to record our meetings now using the OWL. Each speaker will have up to 3 minutes. We will notify you, Executive Director Lindgren, when you have 1 minute remaining, 30 seconds, and when you are out of time by holding up a sign and a verbal cue. Everything said during the meeting is recorded. Please note that the full policy for public comment is printed on page 3 of the meeting packet and explains the procedures the board adheres to in order to maintain a peaceful and respectful and efficient meeting. The purpose of public comment is for the public to share their comments and or concerns with the board. Due to time constraints of our business meeting, there is not time for dialogue. When possible, the board will address questions at the end of the meeting. And if you have a specific question that is not addressed, please email the executive director. I'd like to remind everyone that we are a community of neighbors, and as such, we want our meetings to be as civil and courteous as possible. All right, on my list, I have John Marshall.
So we're, let me, years there?
Just so the sound picks up, I think.
Is that good? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm used to like the village board podium thing, okay. Well, good evening, Park District Commissioners and staff. My name is John Marshall, and my family and I have lived in the Mackenzie neighborhood since 1994 and have always enjoyed the Park District's amazing offerings. Thank you all for your many hours of volunteer service to the district. Like many Wilmette residents, I'm deeply concerned by the actions of federal agents who have been terrorizing our community, detaining people from our streets and next to our parks based simply on their appearance or their occupation. I understand previous concerns that the district didn't want to draw attention to itself, quite understandably, but that time has unfortunately passed. As you likely know, these masked agents and armed agents have been spotted in recent weeks in or near Wheeler, Thornwood, Batman, and Maple Parks, and probably others I'm not aware of. While Customs and Border Protection agents have headed south for the winter, they have vowed to return to the Chicago area in greater numbers this spring, and ICE agents remain in our region. The threat has not gone away and may get worse in coming months. I've been working with a group of other concerned residents who are encouraging our local governments to do all within their power to protect our community. We understand the district has taken many important steps to keep your employees safe, which we are very grateful for. We applaud your foresight in taking those steps and for having the courage to take action. Tonight, I will offer a few suggestions on how the district might better protect residents and visitors, as well as your employees, and you might hear from some other folks as well. You should all have received an email last night with these same suggestions. One step you could take is to increase the amount of signage, making clear that no guns, no unauthorized users, and no masks worn for the purpose of concealing identity will be allowed on district property. I realize you already have some signage to that effect, but more will make the message clearer to more people and help reassure residents. You might also increase signage encouraging patrons to call 911 if they see a violation of these rules, as the village government has encouraged and local police have encouraged us to do. As I said, I'm working with a group of other concerned residents who have more ideas for how the district can continue to respond to this unprecedented situation. And I'd like to pass out copies of the email we sent last night because I realize it came in late and you may not have had adequate time to take a look at it. So thank you again for your volunteer service and for considering these ideas. We look forward to hearing your discussions.
Next one, I will just say Bonnie.
Okay.
Yeah.
Stop.
Close enough?
Sure.
Hi, my name is Bonnie Kim and I am a Wilmette resident. Thank you for discussing tonight what further action you as the park board might take in response to the abduction raids by federal immigration agents that our community has experienced in the past month. We know that you have already been taking measures to keep everyone safe, and thank you for that. And I know that at least a few of you listened to the stories and heartfelt pleas by members of the community at last week's village board meeting to do what the village could to keep residents and visitors to Wilmette safe, and to affirm that we are a welcoming community, that we do not discriminate against people based on immigration status, skin color, or national origin, and that we abide by the rule of law. As referenced in the letter that a group of us residents emailed to the board yesterday, we do think that there are measures that the park can take in furtherance of these goals. I know you have had an opportunity to review the village's welcoming ordinance, and I hope that you will adopt every provision in it that would apply to the park. I'd like to highlight in particular that we would like to see a park ordinance that would, one, ensure that no park property, parking lots, or parks should be used by any federal agent to conduct any civil immigration enforcement operations, including but not limited to a staging area, a detention area, a processing location, or an operation space. As you may know, the library is considering a resolution that mirrors this protection tomorrow night. Two, extend the Illinois Trust Act to all Park District employees rather than just law enforcement, which is what the Trust Act gets at. To clarify for staff and patrons that no park employee will assist federal civil immigration agents in their activities. Three, restrict park employees from inquiring about anyone's immigration status or condition, lessen, restrict, or deny a park service or benefit to anyone based upon immigration status or disclose anyone's immigration status. And four, ensure that park employees gather information regarding the conduct of immigration agents for the purposes of submitting said information to the Illinois Accountability Commission or any other accountability commission. Thank you so much for hearing our concerns, and thank you for your service.
Okay, next on the list, I see Ann Treadway.
Can you add me to the list? Mark Chucky.
And I'll make sure to call in case at the end, anyone who would like to speak is represented.
I feel so alone here without nothing to leave.
We can.
Oh, no. Okay, I think I can make it. My name is Ann Treadway. I'm the co-president of the League of Women Voters of Wilmette. And I'm here with my other co-president, Maureen Doolin. Last Wednesday, the village board passed, as you know, ordinance 2025-02, in quotes, an ordinance in response to Operation Midway Blitz. In this ordinance, as you know, the village took a number of steps to restrict immigration officials from using village property to gather information. From using village property to gather information for the State Accountability Commission, to restrict ICE use of village property, to prohibit village employees from inquiring about anyone's immigration status, to direct the police to comply with the Illinois Trust Act and other things, some of which were mentioned previously. The league urged the village to take such steps, and we supported the ordinance last Wednesday. You have scheduled a discussion of the ordinance for this evening's meeting. In so doing, we assume you may be considering taking actions similar to that taken by the village. The village has offered a template, not all of which is directly transferable to the Park District, but insofar as you can adapt the concept, we agree that you should take the next step. In particular, Park District property could be off limits for enforcement actions. The Park District might want a formal policy for treatment of guests and employees who may be targeted by ICE. And you will wish to report incidents to the Accountability Commission. We are not here to prescribe specifics, but to encourage your board to take the same approach as the village. Protect our community, protect our employees, and protect due process. Thank you.
Amanda Nugent.
Is weird standing here. We're so ingrained. Hi, my name is Amanda Nugent. I'm a Wilmette resident for a long time. Thank you all for what you do and the hours that you spend. I didn't have anything prepared, and I just wanted to echo the really well-prepared thoughts of my fellow Wilmette folks, and just urge you to adopt the strongest provisions that you can to prevent the abuse of power that we've seen in our community in the last month. I was sort of surprised to hear or to realize that the ordinance that was put forth by the village did not actually include so much of the property, which I just think of as being part of Wilmette, but actually is owned by and run by the Park District. So in that vein, having the parking lots, the Gilson Park, all the parks that were previously mentioned, all of our facilities to be off limits would be a really invaluable tool. And as I said, I think everyone else has sort of stated some specifics far better than I could, but I urge you to do everything that you can to make sure that everyone who not only lives here, but visits here and works here feels safe and protected by the people that we look up to. Thank you so much.
Karen Glenmeyer.
I'm really here to just lay it on. I can't believe you didn't publish my brilliant email. I just want to echo what everybody else is saying and thank all of you for everything you've already done, and thank my incredible fellow Wilmettians for their very specific suggestions. I don't have anything specific, but I have something heartfelt, which is our constitutional rights are being violated. Our right to due process, our right to free speech, our right to avoid unreasonable search and seizure, especially the rights of those folks who are not white. And that's just not okay, and it's serious. And I know our options are limited, but I just want to urge us all to take it as seriously as we possibly can, because this is real and it's not right. And as wrong as it is anywhere, it's especially wrong in our parks. You know, this is where kids play, and we should just be able to be free and skip and jump and hop, and you can't do that when immigration agents are abducting people. So as explicitly and clearly as we could possibly be about, we do not allow this in our parks and in our facilities. Let's do so. And I know enforcement, At the village board meeting, we all were disheartened to learn how limited we are, but we gotta try. So thanks for trying.
Mark Fireville?
Mark, real quick, are you aware of the policy? You speak all the time that you are being recorded and that will go on channel. Just,
I'm being recorded or what?
yes, yeah, that's the new video and audio
There's
recording.
video on that?
Yes.
Oh, this is incredible. That was my first statement. So, okay, let me start over. Mark Weiermiller. I was gonna ask that these meetings be taped because in the past they have not been taped or they've been audio taped and then you have to FOIA them. And it's impossible to even understand what's going on. So this is great. This is a great thing that you're taping these. And hopefully it's on the website. I don't have to FOIA it. I could just click on something and watch it like the village board meetings. So I'm excited about that. I have some other issues besides talking about ICE. People might know me. We have a Facebook group, Wilmette Connection. I do a fair amount of blogging. I'm on Twitter. You can follow me. You might agree and disagree with me. Couple things with the Park District. I'd like you guys to sell the Beth Hillel property you paid $5.5 million for. Some of the board members were quoted. It's a huge opportunity for us. It's a huge opportunity to expand government. In Glenview, they just bought a big property or they're trying to buy acres and acres of land to expand their parks. Parks are great. Wilmette is great, but I'm not sure if we need more government running the parks. So that's one of my issues here. I would sell it and let a private developer put it back on the tax rolls and we can move on. And the parks are big enough. They're great, but we don't need more parks. As far as the ICE, I wasn't even going to comment on the ICE thing. I didn't realize I'm at a minute 32 here. I would not waste Wilmette Park District's time, money on a symbolic ordinance. The supremacy clause says the federal government can come in and do whatever they want. I know you guys maybe want optics and virtual signaling and say, hey, we're for this, we're for that. But I'd rather have you guys focus on the parks, the kids, the property taxes. Maybe we can talk about the fence some more. Everybody's excited about the fence. There's also risk of you might not get federal grants if you start fooling around with the federal government. That's something that could be recourse against you. And as far as ICE goes, what I'm understanding is that they're going after specific people. ICE was on my block the other day and they were looking for a specific person and they wasn't there and they left. And there were 8 landscaping crews. They did not interview any of them. They just moved on. And so a lot of this stuff is misinformation here. So, but Wilmette's great. You guys are doing a great job. I'm at 2:31. I'm out of stuff to say. So thanks again, Mark Weiermiller. You can follow me at Wilmette Connection or on Twitter, on Facebook, or maybe see me at some local bar downtown. Thank you for your time.
Before we close public comment, any other public comment to address the board? Okay. With that being said, public comment will be closed and we'll move on to 4.0 old business, of which there is none tonight. So 5.0 new business. 5.1 financial audit services bid update. Sheila?
Yeah, so I put a memo together talking about the results of the RFP that we sent out. As I suspected, Lauterbach came back with the best quote. They're like the biggest in the Park District world. We have a great relationship with them. I like them. I have a lot of experience with public, accounting firms. And I'd like for you to, we'll have the contract at the December board meeting so that you can approve it because it's more than 1 year. And I'd like for you to consider their contract. Do you have any questions about it?
So we just only got two parts.
Well, we got 2 now.
Couple of others that respond.
Yeah, 2 firms did not respond. But one firm asked for information that I sent to them and they still didn't respond. 2 firms did and
Well, we appreciate you going out. I mean, I think that was a part of our request that we figure out what our options were and you did as such and it's like we have the relationship can be maintained.
the price is something that I'm very concerned about. And I just want to make sure that that price is affordable. And so, like I said, they were only in the offices for 1 day this year. And they did the rest of the audit from their offices and we did all the stuff electronically. I think it works really well. And they're good. I mean, I think they are. So
And as you said, they are the biggest, and they're giving us a 3-year price. We're Michigan Shores, we usually try to put that for 3 or 4 years. We've got locked in for the next 3 years. It looks great. It looks great.
For comparison, Snickers bid was like for like, they were identical bid. Yeah, it's, and it was like for like, because they sent me like their, they sent me Shopper's information, because they do Shopper. And so, but I mean, I like the firm. Well, the bid was
So the
low,
scope.
right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Any other comments? All right, 5.2, discussion of village ordinance.
I've got
No, I was gonna say Andrew.
Let's go.
I've got an update I'll read through, just a little bit of background, catch us up to where we're at, especially the those that are here. And then we'll turn it over to Andrew, who the board has already reached out with multiple questions for Andrew to look through, as well as some of the background that he's done. And then we'll go through those questions after. So obviously in response to the November 12th meeting and the ordinance passed by the village here, we have been reviewing that document internally alongside Andrew. And I wanted to talk about, that's the reason, but what we've done, some of you are aware, but for some of you that are not aware, going back to January of this year, the Park District has implemented agency-wide protocols, and we're addressing kind of the risks related to federal enforcement activity. Some of those measures are having clearly defined staff-only areas. Confirmation, one example we like to bring up is that staff offices are staff-only spaces, of course, but for some of our park workers and people like that don't have an office, their vehicle is a staff-only space. So that is a place that they can go to provide some free safe space for them to get on the phone. And we've given guidance to all of our employees on where those places are for our facility staff. Say at the CRC, that staff has been given instructions on which spaces are public specifically and which are not, so that they're well equipped. If you're looking at like a program space, that program space is for those people that are signed up for that program. That is not a openly public space. So those are some examples that staff have, as well as who to call and when to call immediately. Let's see. So extensive Know Your Rights outreach has been delivered to our staff. We have staff that English is not their first language, so we have gone a step further and made sure that we've had one-on-one conversations with the translator so that they're able to truly understand what that paperwork is. We provided it in multiple languages as well, but we wanted to make sure you can hand out things to your staff. We hope they read all the emails and things like that, but this was so important. We did give the extra caution, the extra time to make sure that every single person knows what that is, where their situation is, and how they can be prepared. For safety and public guidance, our parks and facilities are gun-free zones, and staff are educated on calling 911 and not making assumptions. So if they see a gun in a park or near a facility, they are call 911 first, and then they will follow the phone tree that they're given to reach not only our HR and risk team, but myself directly. Coordination with law enforcement. As many of you know, the Wilmette Police Department is our enforcement agent. We have an IGA with them to help enforce our park code and ordinances, and they have been a valued partner throughout this whole process. I cannot speak highly enough about the staff-to-staff relationship that we have had with the village. When they were in town, if our team would see something, I would directly text the village manager on a location and time, and he was doing the same for us so that we could stay in close contact. And because of those messages, we were able to alert staff that we know we're working in those areas and help them be in a protected place. We've reached out to other districts. I know of 0 park districts that have something currently in place. I've actually reached out to the state Illinois Association of Park Districts to confirm that. So we didn't have anything other specific to parks to scout out and question and see how that works for us, similar to, how the villages are looking at other village ordinances, because park districts do have a separate set of laws and rules of which we're governed that Andrew will so kindly go through and after this. And so this truly has been an exercise in determining what we have in place now and how we can address any of the gaps that we may have with what we currently have in place. With that, I'll leave it to Andrew.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, so I'll just start with like, I guess, a little bit of a brief overview and some background, and then I can go through some of these specific questions that you all sent to me. And then obviously, if I miss anything or if you have additional questions or want more information, I can certainly do my best to address it, recognizing that we are in a little bit of uncharted territory. So there might just be some things that are either educated guesses or I just don't have a specific answer for. I think as Chris indicated, you guys are already doing a lot of things, both at the Park District and throughout the community with what the village has done. I think the other challenge that we have to recognize, the reality of which is it doesn't necessarily matter what any of us think personally or collectively as a board. There are limits to what we can do as a Park District just based on the statutory authority that we have. And we also have to recognize, and I think to help educate the public as well, is that we as a Park District have different set of rules that govern how we operate. It's different from the library district, it's different from the school district, and it's different from the village. And if you look at sort of the governmental entities in town, the village is a home rule body, has the most power to regulate and govern. Essentially, they can do anything they want on a local level related to their government and affairs that isn't preempted by the state. So they have broad authority to enact all sorts of policies that they think make the most sense for the village. We, the Park District, the Library District, are what we would call non-home rule. So essentially, the only powers we have are those that are specifically granted to us by statute and those that are sort of reasonably inferred from those grants. So what that essentially means in plain speak is that if we want to do something, we need to find a statute that says you have the power to do this. We can't, even if we think it's a great idea, we think it makes a ton of sense for the community. If we can't find a statute that says you have the power to do it, we just can't do it. And that's the reality of the unit of government that we're working with it. So obviously we've heard a lot in terms of what the village has done in Wilmette. There's some other villages and cities around Chicagoland that have adopted similar measures. And most of the authority for that grows out of the Illinois Trust Act, which is a state law that essentially says state and local law enforcement cannot participate or assist federal agencies with civil immigration actions. That essentially relates to primarily whether or not people are here legally and what their status is. That's been classified as a civil enforcement action. And so state and local law enforcement cannot participate in that. And so the village ordinance includes some other stuff, but they're sort of building off the construct that was already there in state law and just elaborating on that a little bit more. We don't have law enforcement as a Park District, so we don't have that nexus to the state law. So really, we can do some of the things that you see in this ordinance. We could do some of the things that you see being proposed in the library's resolution. But in terms of like specifically tying into the Trust Act, we don't have the authority as a Park District to do that because that statute doesn't apply to us. What we do have is in Section 8-1 of the Park Code, we have general authority to adopt reasonable rules and regulations through an ordinance, essentially regulating the public's use of our parks and facilities. And we already do that in the conduct ordinance that you guys have on the books that essentially regulates how members of the public can use your parks, and you guys get to amend that how you see fit. And so that ordinance was obviously not drafted with an eye towards regulating generically law enforcement or even specifically ICE activity. So it's not a perfect fit and the perfect solution for the problems that the community is facing now. There is some language in there that we could certainly point to without any additional changes in terms of how our parking lots are used, park hours, certain types of conduct requiring permits. But there are also carve-outs and exceptions for law enforcement. So it creates a little bit of ambiguity in terms of could we use those provisions as currently drafted to try to enforce them against federal law enforcement. From the enforcement standpoint, as Chris mentioned, we don't have a police force. We rely on the village of Wilmette to assist us through intergovernmental agreements. And so really for us, and I certainly don't want to speak for the village or the police in terms of what they will do, but my just general understanding is certainly if they're called, they'll come out to investigate. They'll make sure that whoever's out there purporting to be law enforcement is in fact law enforcement, and will do what they can to try to keep things from getting out of control or escalating. but certainly they're not going to, probably physically intercede. They're not going to try to escort or remove federal officers from public property. And so what our recourse would be is if we felt like something was happening on Park District property inconsistent with our ordinances, our move would be to go into federal court and seek a TRO or a preliminary injunction saying we have ordinances that say you can't do XYZ, XYZ is happening, and we need a federal judge to say, stop it. And so if that's the route the board is interested in pursuing, certainly my recommendation would be to consider modifying some of the language in our conduct ordinance to be a little bit more explicit about what we are allowing and not allowing, so that we're not walking into federal court with ambiguity and we're opening it up to interpretation. So that if we want to say no staging, no enforcement, no detention, that we adopt language that specifically says that. So we're not trying to parse language that was really originally drafted for a different purpose, and we're trying to kind of shoehorn it to covering federal law enforcement. The other challenges we have is we can control and regulate to a degree our parks and property, but what we can't do because of the supremacy clause that the gentleman in the audience mentioned earlier, we can't regulate the federal government. We can't regulate federal law enforcement. So we can say you can't use our property for staging. You can't use it for enforcement, or whatever else related to the use of the property, but we can't dictate what federal officers do. So we can't say federal officers can't carry weapons. We can't say federal officers can't wear masks. That's beyond our reach. I do believe the state of California passed a law in September of this year trying to ban masks and a few other things with federal officers within the state of California. I think the Department of Justice is currently suing them as a constitutional violation under the supremacy clause. Hasn't been decided, but I think many legal scholars think it's a uphill battle for California to win. So you guys would have similar and probably even more of a challenge trying to enforce your own regulations in terms of how federal officers conduct themselves through your own policies and ordinances. So things like telling the federal officers how to do their job, we don't have the authority to do that. But what we can do is restrict certain circumstances in which they come into Park District property. The other issue we have is that no matter what our ordinances say, they still have the right to enforce federal law. So if they have a warrant, a judicial warrant that allows them to arrest somebody, they can, regardless of what our ordinances say, they can come onto our property and enforce that warrant. If they're pursuing a suspect in town, for example, and that suspect runs through a park to try to get away, just because we have a sign up that says no enforcement activity in our parks, that's not going to stop the federal officers, just like it wouldn't stop the local police for pursuing someone or the state police under the right circumstances. So no matter what framework we set up, there's going to be, for lack of a better word, holes in the protection it provides. And it's just the reality that we face in our system where there's federal law enforcement, state and local, and there's certain things we can restrict and certain things we can't restrict. Let's see if there's any other specific questions that I didn't cover. So if we look at what the village passed, the Village of Wilmette passed, I think we can, again, we can't pull directly from the Trust Act because we don't have that authority because that statute doesn't cover us. Obviously, we're not going to get into some of the provisions that they cover in terms of licenses for landscapers and gas operated blowers. That's separate and distinct in terms of responsibility. But I think the things that we can capture and can pull forward, if it's, the direction the board wants to pursue, is we can control things like using parks and property for staging, for enforcement, for temporary housing. We could certainly update our ordinances to specifically address that. We could certainly, and I believe we probably already do have stuff on the books in terms of how our employees interact with members of the public in terms of not asking questions about immigration status. Obviously, there are still certain federal laws that we have to follow. So, for example, we do have to inquire on residency and citizenship status when we hire new employees. That's a federal law. We can't not do that. So there are certain questions, certain things we have to follow under existing law. But some of the other framework that you saw in the village's ordinance are certainly things that if the Park District isn't already doing, we could certainly adopt or formalize. And so I think in terms of what an ordinance might look like, if that was the route the board is interested in pursuing, it would look something like the proposed resolution that the library is adopting, which is essentially talking about how the public and how federal law enforcement can use or not use public property and facilities. So I think that document that they published in advance of their meeting would probably be a decent framework for something, if that's the direction the board was interested in pursuing, something that we could use as kind of a model of what it might look like from a framework standpoint.
Since the Park District uses the Wilmette Police Department for its enforcement, and the Wilmette Police Department is constrained by the Illinois Trust Act, isn't that then, if the Park District went to follow them, it would still be under, they still would be operating under the Illinois Trust Act.
Correct. So just as a hypothetical to try to respond to your question, let's just say the Parks District did want to assist the federal government with their civil immigration enforcement. Our enforcement agency locally is the Wilmette Police. If we called the police and said, we want you to do this, the Illinois Trust Act and now their ordinance constrains them from doing it, so they can't do it. So yes, so in a way, because the Wilmette Police Department is the Park District's enforcement authority, this ordinance is already governing how they police your property.
That I just wanted to make that.
Right.
The ordinance, the village ordinance. Should take my laptop up because I highlighted it in there.
Well, while you're doing that, can you quickly explain that some people in the crowd may not understand how we differ from, say, Evanston that has a rec department, and how that kind of play here?
Yeah, so in Illinois, most park districts are separate units of government governed by a separate set of statutes, the Park District Code, and then some ancillary related statutes. There are a few places, Evanston being one of them, where they don't have a separate unit of government, a park district. They have a rec department or a park and recs department that's a department under the purview of the city or the village. So it operates, especially in larger cities like Evanston, it operates almost as a separate division, but it is a department of the city, and therefore it's under the management and control of the city.
With home
rule.
Right.
Correct.
So all Evanston parks are governed by any Evanston statute, the way Howard Park would be governed by Wilmette statute, because Howard Park is owned by the village.
Correct. And that can certainly create some confusion when you have neighboring communities that share a boundary, and then kind of outward perception is it seems like they have a park department, just like you guys are a park district, but in that case, the city of Evanston controls the park and rec department. Whereas here you guys are separate in town. Yes, you do a lot of work in partnership with the village, but they don't control you. Obviously, you guys control the park district as the board.
So did you find it?
Yeah, yeah. So one of the questions of like looking at this is the 6 of the ordinance, and it's section D, village property, village parking lots, public parks, open spaces, number 2. So 2, 3, and 4. In number 2, it says no civil immigration enforcement operation shall be conducted at any time inside any village property. So, I mean, I read that to say then, for example, Village Hall, that under the ordinance, an immigration enforcement officer could not enter the Village Hall to arrest someone. Am I correct in reading it that way? And if that's correct, does the Park District have any similar authority?
I mean, the answer to that is yes or no. It depends what it depends what the enforcement authority is. So if it's strictly a civil enforcement, then no, they wouldn't be able to go into federal property to enforce it. However, if they're there with a criminal warrant, if they're there with a judicial warrant, that changes it, and they would have the ability to enter. Also, they would have the ability to go in, for example, if they wanted to talk to somebody, right? If they want, just like any other citizen or person could walk into Village Hall to conduct business. If they wanted to go in there to try to speak with someone, certainly it's not like a magic barrier that would prevent them from walking in.
Right.
So again, that's what I was talking about before, is there's holes in all of this in terms of what we can do to create protections.
Because that's what I'm saying, is that if at least there were reports that immigration enforcement officers are detaining people based on a characteristics, darker skin, what, speaking Spanish, whatever. And so like if they observed someone going into the village hall, that they felt the person that these characteristics, could they go into the village hall and what, saying that they're not having one, could they follow them into village hall, or would this, and then detain them, or does this section that no civil immigration enforcement operations shall be conducted inside any village property, or would that control? But
Again, it would depend on it would depend on the facts, right? Like, if they saw this person committing a crime elsewhere and the person fled,
yeah,
trying to seek safety, they could follow them in, right? And this wouldn't stop them. If they had a warrant and this person happened, let's just say they were a village employee and they had a warrant out to arrest them, and they watched them go in and they were following them in to place them under arrest pursuant to the warrant, certainly they would have the authority to do that. If it's maybe more what you're talking about, sort of these general sweeps where they're just looking for people, they're identifying them based on how they talk, what they do, what they look like, and just wanted to follow this person. And then in theory, this ordinance should stop them. Again, the challenge is what we've seen reported in the media and on TV. Just because there are restrictions in place doesn't necessarily mean the federal agents are following it. And then the problem is if they walk in and attempt to arrest, detain, question, what kind of resistance is there going to be? What's the reaction going to be? Those are the questions that are difficult to answer when. So in theory, yes, this ordinance should stop some of that activity, but in reality, how well it will work, I guess only time will tell.
Well, I mean, that is the big question, how well it's any support, but I guess part of the question is, that could the park district have a similar, what was we said, not an ordinance, but just our operating rules.
Yeah, I think a lot of what you see in section D here, the park district could adopt something, if not identical, pretty similar.
Yeah,
And then I think that ties back into what Chris was speaking about earlier in terms of private spaces and employee-only spaces versus public places. I think creating those lines of demarcation helps, at least on paper, create some of those restrictions where you can't go into those areas just because you want to. You need to have some sort of a warrant or something giving you permission to do it. And that's why I think creating those spaces is a good idea. So when you create those spaces, when you have language like this, it helps, to the extent we can, strengthen the protections for employees and members of the public.
Well, that came to my mind when I was golf club, and does the park district any authorities say, okay, immigration and enforcement officers can't come in the parking lot, look at who's working on the golf course, and detain anyone who's there, and that's again, you don't know if having this restriction. But could the park district have that type of restriction to keep federal officers from coming on to?
Yeah, we could certainly adopt under our general rulemaking authority under section 8.1 of the park code. We could adopt things that look very similar to what's in section D.
That's, yeah.
And obviously there's going to be like, we could say no staging, no temporary detention, things like that. But again, I don't think public streets, public parking lots, like we couldn't restrict a single vehicle from making a pass through a parking lot. It's just not right. But we could certainly stop a staging area. We could stop groups of cars setting up there as like a temporary base of operations. Those are things we could restrict.
I get the impression that doing that, like staging, is already prohibited under, the way what park district operates, that to do something like that, they would need a permit. And so, it's already, it's not.
Put it another way, what is the difference right now between the rules and regulations going on at Howard Park, which is falls under the ordinance, or say that in the park, or is there any?
Now that the village has adopted their ordinance, so they own the park, or they own Howard Park and lease it to you guys. So you guys sort of have joint operational control, right? They have the ability to control it because they own it. You guys have the ability to make it subject to your conduct ordinance because you lease it. Now based on, and I think this was already, because of state law, this already existed. This ordinance really just clarifies it. But essentially, yes, it's now included in this list of public parks and open spaces where civil immigration enforcement is prohibited in Howard Park.
Mm-hmm.
You guys don't have language yet that specifically calls out civil immigration enforcement actions in your parks, but you do have some more generic language in your conduct ordinance that talks about various activities, how to use parking lots and things that are allowed with or without permits. Again, this is where you get into some of the ambiguity in there. It's because it's more designed for the general public and not law enforcement specific activities. There are carve outs for law enforcement or official business or emergency activities. So again, is civil immigration, is that considered an emergency? I don't know, but it's ambiguous enough that certainly I wouldn't want to have to rely on that and that to, to go into court and say, hey, we have a language that says you can't go in here. And they say, okay, yeah, but there's a carve out for law enforcement for emergencies. And this was an emergency. It's like, well, okay, that's an interesting argument to have to deal with versus if that's something you want to be explicit about, let's go ahead and get specific language that calls it out. So there is no question. And there's probably a decent argument to be made, right? Like trying to create, especially since the Wilmette police are the ones enforcing it community wide, whether it's your parks or their property, creating some consistency so that across the community it's the same, as opposed to like, well, this park has one set of rules, these other parks have different sets of rules. Maybe not everybody understands who owns which piece of property. So there could certainly be arguments to, within the power that you have under the park code, and as good partners in the community, to work with the village to try to align what you're doing close to them within the framework that you can adopt, just so there's consistency across the board. So everybody in the community knows, and these are kind of the general expectations of what can and can't happen within our public spaces, whether it's owned by the park district or the village.
Right. Okay, that's compelling. I have one more question. So Chris and I were talking today, we have 1,100, I don't know, people always get surprised when I say this. We issue 1,100 W-2s. Park District is maybe the second largest employer in Wilmette. And everything we've done up until this point has been really fairly apolitical. Like when you have an organization like we are that's mission driven and your employees have concerns, real or perceived, what do you do to make it a safe work environment? Is there anything else that we can do along those lines to protect our staff now and going forward, right? There's no sunset to these perceptions or tensions or fears. What else can we do to protect our staff, if anything?
It sounds like you guys are doing many things already. I don't know that I can think of anything specific that's jumping out of like, here's an omission or a hole in what you're doing. I think part of it is just educating and informing so the staff understands and recognizing all the things that you're doing to protect them. Obviously, a lot of the information that you might capture related to your employees, their residency status, whether or not they're citizens, how they're, what their permission is to work, that's not stuff that you're going to release to the public at large. It's not going to be something subject to FOIA. Obviously, federal government has the ability to come in with a warrant and request your I-9 paperwork. They can do things like that. That's obviously, if you're weighing the pros and cons of how involved do we get in this situation, obviously the con side is with this current administration, there seems to be a lot of retaliation when any entity stands up and takes a position counter to what the current administration wants. They seem to like to retaliate and go after that. Obviously, one area is the money, so federal funds. You guys being different than the village, you don't get direct federal funds for very many things. There might be the occasional grant opportunity, but you're not getting federal money for like road improvements or things like that the village might, so you don't have as much to lose on the financial side of things. But certainly if they wanted to come in and audit you guys and look at all your employment records, it's not to say that you aren't doing everything you're supposed to, but for as many employees as you have, trying to pull all that paperwork together within the 2 or 3 day window that you're afforded under those warrants it would be a hassle, right? It would probably require most of your full-time staff to be pulling records.
Well, but it's informative to say, we could start that as a fun January project, right? To prepare ourselves to just have it ready in case it comes, even though we know we're above board and no one welcomes it audited. In weird times like this, it's potential and
right.
And we might want to just do what we need to do to start getting that ready in case it does happen. And that's helpful.
I said, Chris, and I mean, I've been before, does Wilmette Park District receive any federal funds? Are we aware of any?
It would,
So you have not as long as I've been here.
it would be, as Andrew said, it would be an occasional grant, that we would, apply for. But that would be a pretty one-off situation. The most recent grants were some of the, Inflation Reduction Act grant money that was out there for some of the environmental work. And a lot of that's been frozen, unfortunately, today, so, it's not likely.
I would say most of the grants that you guys deal with, like the park grant or NOSLAG grant, is all through the state. That would be separate, and not impacted by federal government decisions.
Andrew, can I just ask as a point of clarification? So if the parks are considered a gun-free zone, so does that include law enforcement or are they excluded from that?
They're excluded from that. And that gets into what I was talking about before about we can regulate the public using our parks, how they use it, but we can't tell other government agencies, particularly the federal government, how to conduct their law enforcement operations. So if their agents dress a certain way, if they carry certain firearms as part of their official duties, that's not something we can regulate.
I've always thought of it as like an education part, right? Where if a resident sees someone with a gun in the park, you make no assumptions, you call the police, and the police then are required to attend. And if it is a federal enforcement situation, then the police are immediately involved and documented, and by the Trust Act have to report to the Illinois Accountability Board, and that's something we can do. And it's really secondary to park protection, right? I mean, we've done. I mentioned this at the last meeting where we pushed this to the community, where when the Nerf game for the seniors in Katrina came around, but it's really no exceptions if you think you see someone with a weapon, make the call. But yeah, our signage is something we've looked at. We want to continue to make sure is available, but it's almost like the more signage you have doesn't really matter in this situation, but it is something that we've discussed about making sure is up to date and some of these signs fall off and the landscape grows over. And those things are things that we've talked about and we will continue to talk about.
Yeah, and just to kind of piggyback or circle back on that comment, like even before all of this became an issue, we had gun-free zones in the park, right? But then even the state can come around and make changes to the law that supersede what we can do. And like a good example of that was the change to the concealed carry laws a few years ago, where the parks themselves are gun-free zones, but people do have the right, who are concealed carry permit holders, to have them and then come into the parking lot and take them off their body and secure them in the car. So even the state will create carve-outs that override what you guys want to do in the parks.
Can you speak again to section D then and how it is a benefit to us to have similar language across all the parks so there's no confusion with the knowledge that the enforcement is really not possible then? What is the benefit of it then?
So right now, the village has, through this ordinance, made very clear that they are not going to assist in any civil immigration enforcement on the federal side, and no civil immigration enforcement activity can take place on village property. You guys have some language in your conduct ordinance now that speaks generally to the public's use of your property, but you don't have specific language that speaks about federal law enforcement or civil immigration enforcement. So if you were to update that language to mirror or look something similar to what's in this section D, you would strengthen that ordinance language. So if federal immigration enforcement activities, they did try to use it for a staging area or things like that, you would have a document in an ordinance that said, we prohibit this, and you can take that document into court and ask the judge to issue a TRO that says, hey, we as a board that regulates the park district spaces, we've adopted this ordinance that says you can't do this. Federal government's doing it anyway. We want you to issue an injunction or a restraining order that says you can't do it. And obviously from a consistency standpoint, because there are some open spaces and public parks that are owned by the village and some that are owned by the park district, there's at least a decent argument to be made to try to create a cohesive set of rules across so that it's consistent for the community, that different parks aren't treated differently. So I think right now, for example, to go back to the Howard Park, that's probably the best example, owned by the village, this ordinance would control it. So very clearly based on this ordinance, no civil immigration enforcement action in there. Your parks right now, it's a little bit ambiguous in terms of does it prohibit it, does it not prohibit it, how strong is the language? So certainly if you're looking to sort of bring your ordinance up a little bit closer to what the village has done and what the library is considering doing, some sort of specific changes to kind of pick up some of this language and drop it into your ordinance would probably be the route to go if that's, you know, the direction the board's leading.
Any questions on that point specifically, as it seems like our enforcement ability is pretty limited. So this at least gives us language for consistency.
Yeah, and from an enforcement, like, I think in terms of, you know, when Chris was commenting before, if there's been any suspected activity and it's already taken place, I think things are already happening where people can call, whether it's employees, members of the community, they can call the police and the police will probably come out to investigate what's going on. That's going to happen regardless, even if you do nothing and you just leave your ordinances the way they are. You can always call the police, they'll respond and come out and take a look and do the things that they think are appropriate under the circumstances. I think in terms of strengthening your ordinance, what that would then give you to do is if for some reason they're out there, it gives you a document to take into court that says we have a specific prohibition against federal law enforcement, civil immigration actions inside our parks, and judge, we want you to help us enforce those.
Even though the federal actions supersede our ordinance.
Yeah, again, it's going to depend what they're doing. There are going to be certain activities that you can't enjoin them from doing. But just sort of some of this general stuff, this staging, this setting up, this erecting temporary detention facilities, you would be able to regulate that.
And it's not going to have an impact in real time, but then it gives us the opportunity to seek and relief through the judicial system.
And I think there's one specific location where this would be hugely applicable, and that's Skills.
And Gilson comes to mind as well.
I think all of the parks, but I think given that we have a neighbor in the Gilson Park that, I mean, the Homeland Security owns the Coast Guard Center, and
that's another, I mean, we don't control that. That would be federal property, so they can't say you can't use it.
Agreed, but without having specific language about staging and things, you couldn't injunct them to the right usage. Enjoin them from the using the, thank you.
You can't anyway, because it's federal land.
Right, so.
No, I'm not talking about the actual itself.
Right, so we would not have any ability, like if they wanted to go to the Coast Guard property and set up, that's nothing that we can control.
Right.
If we don't have ordinances, right, maybe it's more convenient for them because the Coast Guard property is smaller.
For the DNC.
Right, it might be more logical for them or easier for them to stage out in Gilson and kind of spill off. We could certainly adopt ordinances that restrict that, but again, all they'd have to do is shift their operation to the Coast Guard property, and that's beyond our control at that point, but we have to keep them out of Gilson.
I mean, my example is the DNC, they use the Coast Guard facility and stage along that drive. And we probably, wouldn't necessarily help us, but it would certainly be closer.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then again, I think that Mike's point too, if there is a violation, other than what you could already do, calling the police and having them come out to confirm that it is in fact federal law enforcement and not just a random group of people running around with guns and masks and trying to de-escalate a situation, it's not going to be immediate. I mean, it's going to be okay. You have an ordinance on the books that says no staging. You get a report that someone's staging. The police go out and confirm, yes, they're staging. Okay, then now we have to put together court papers, run in, file it in the court. Maybe you get it hurt the same day, more likely it's the next day. You know, it's not an immediate process, right? So if they show up in the morning and they start doing it.
No, I understand.
It's going to happen for 24, 48 hours.
It's also expensive.
Right.
And we're not the village.
Right.
What direction do you need from us, Chris, on this?
Well, I'd like to know if the board wants to make changes and maybe they'd like to see them, or we could start a draft, if you want, of what some things could look like for your review. But at least some sort of direction on if you wanna incorporate some of this in, say, section D that we've talked about and what that looks like, similar to the libraries, I think is, as Andrew said, is something that could have probably the more similar language that would apply to our properties, then that's what I think.
So,
Go ahead.
so it sounds like we've got four alternatives. One is that we decide that what we're currently doing is adequate. We could go the library route with some sort of a resolution. We could do a standalone ordinance, or we could modify the existing conduct ordinance. Is that basically the summary of our four choices?
Yeah, and I think if you went the resolution route, that would be a little bit more, that would be essentially just kind of a formal public statement from the board about, you know, we're all a community, we disagree with what the, kind of like what the start of the Wilmette ordinance looks like, where they're sort of providing their official commentary to the federal government. Obviously, the federal government doesn't have to listen, but you guys could express your opinion that you disagree and want people to follow the Constitution, want people to follow rule of law and those types of things. And then the ordinance route, you could do a standalone ordinance, but because of the way you guys have your property currently regulated with the conduct ordinance, I think probably the best way to do it would be modifications to the conduct ordinance. So it's rolled into one document, because you're going to use, these are just going to be a series of 4 or 5 or 6, however many regulations, but you want to fit them into the overall framework in terms of enforcement and all the other things. You'd want to roll that into the conduct ordinance would be my recommendation.
So it'd be just an amendment to the conduct.
Correct. Yep.
And that's of the 4 options, that's your recommendation.
If you were going to make specific changes and you wanted to see something akin to what the village did or what the library is considering doing, then it would sort of be a combination of the 3 and 4. So it would be an ordinance, and it would just be, it would be a standalone ordinance, but it would be formulated in a way that makes modifications to your existing conduct ordinance. And once passed, then it would just be folded into that larger document.
Is there any benefit? Does anyone on the board wish to think of any remaining questions over the next 24 hours to send to executive director? Or should we proceed with our opinion?
So I think that, I don't think so. I think, you know, that was a very good, really nice presentation, very clarified a lot of items. And I mean, I at least totally agree with that, the idea of modifying what is what's already in existence for many of the reasons that you said, that to provide a uniform way of addressing the Sylvan Village problems. Everyone is consistent across the villages, different village governments and units.
I would support that as well.
I think the uniformity is beneficial. It's disheartening that in the end, it doesn't have a lot of teeth, but I do think the idea from border to border, is the way that Wilmette operates, various sides of government operates, are consistent, I think, as there. No, I would just add that, you know, I think based on what I'm hearing from our constituents and citizens in the community, there's been a lot of concern about the masks and the unidentified vehicles coming in, and it's, you know, scary, and residents are concerned. And I understand that, you know, California is going through a process, and it sounds like it's not a battle, but that would be one that, you know, I'd just like to continue to watch and see if there is any additional room for discussion and follow up on that as this plays out. But I'm supportive of the direction going forward.
Mr. Duffy?
Thank you.
You know, while you catch your breath, I had a question. I do not want to rely on rumors, so I want to ask directly. I understand that at some point in the Thornwood episode that some community members called the police, and the police advised they would not or could not. And again, I don't know that to be certain. Maybe others have better knowledge than me, but if the park district employees call the police or call through your chain, through your tree, I just want to be sure we as employers have a method to support our employees.
I was at the village meeting. I thought they said they responded. Maybe they didn't respond as quickly as some folks wanted them to, but I thought that was discussed at the village.
Yeah, they were on a call. Someone else, when that call came in, they talked about it in the week. Yeah. Yeah, and I would say we work really closely with police. I mean, our beach staff have direct contacts.
Absolutely.
And, you know, everyone throughout our agency, unfortunately, we deal with police quite a bit. And for a number of reasons. And so we have, I mean, Lindsay's got, knows all the officers at the top really well. And I have a, you know.
Is that a good thing?
Yeah. And I mean, with, police chief, I mean, him and I have texted regularly and I mean, he's always incredibly helpful and responsive. And, so I think that there's a really strong relationship there and, it's more of a partnership.
We have a majority of direction, but before I close, do you have any other comments that you'd like to make?
No, I think it makes sense for continuity's sake.
I agree. I think, practically speaking, this makes a ton of sense to align for the uniformity. I agree, 3-4 works. I have a particular feeling that we've done very well being deliberate. So members of the public, like, if this isn't ready for December, it's going to be ready in January. We have a history of going through stuff pretty closely legally, and we will be deliberate. We've done well with it. I think the other thing to take away from this is the direction we all seem to be giving Chris is, you know, don't rest on your laurels. We have 1,100 employees that we want to look out for. And if we get to the point where we do adopt this, we will then go to conference in January and have a lot of discussion with our Park District partners about what we've done and what we will continue to do. So yeah, I'm supportive. I have really never been more proud of our Park District in terms of what we've done to support our staff over the last year. And I think we're on the right direction.
So for clarity's sake, can I just ask this question? Are we talking about modification of our existing, code of conduct? That's the direction we're going.
It was a standalone to modify.
So it's amended.
Yeah, it would be presented in the form of an ordinance that modifies the existing conduct ordinance.
But something I think that's important to highlight too is just that we've reached out to park districts all over Illinois and I believe farther, and we really are pioneering this effort, which is an intimidating thing to do. I'll say that. You don't have to.
No, it is. It's an urgency thing that
Yeah.
we need to be really careful.
And therefore, what we are so fortunate to be a part of is that the Illinois Association of Park Districts is the strongest in the nation. So the fact that we are leaders in this, in the leader of park districts across the US is a pretty remarkable thing. So thank you for your efforts. And I think that we have more to learn too. So if this looks different, again, bear with us in that. I think we're trying to do our best as the people writing it for the first time.
Just want to also jump in though, I saw a reference earlier today about the Lake County Forest Preserve possibly fencing some sort, but then when I heard beforehand, I like went on Google and looked, I couldn't find anything, but I don't know. I'm just throwing up.
It's possible others are deliberating as well. And you know, if we could make a note to revisit this in 3 months' time when we start planning for summer season. I mean, with Gilson closed, the activity was more likely in the streets of Lima, but I could imagine a scenario in which there is activity in the Gilson parking lot where law enforcement might park appropriately and conduct action. And there's not much we could do, but I would love us to be prepared as a team to inform staff or patrons on what to do next.
Especially our teenage staff.
Our teenage staff is not equipped to face ice that big.
And I think too, another point just to add on, like, this does not have to be a one and done thing, meaning we can continue to monitor. And so things like the masks or the badging or things like that, what appear to be long cuts now, if there are outcomes in court that change that to make it look like it is an option, we can always, whether that's in a month, 3 months, a year, whatever, we can always revisit and make additional changes when there is more legal authority to support the positions. Because obviously we are, as park districts, chartering a little bit of new territory here. So I think it is important the first go round to make sure we're on solid legal footing to the extent we can be, so that we feel confident in the document if we need to use it. But that doesn't mean we can't continue to monitor and then make updates when we feel like the law has advanced to a place where we have good faith arguments to add those restrictions if we feel they're appropriate.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
Yes.
Okay, moving on to 5.3, discussion to cancel the December 15th committee of the whole. For clarity, we did not need to have the financial committee of the whole meeting before today's meeting, which I'm sorry for any confusion that gave. We didn't want tonight to go without having our meeting, but for December, given the time of the year and given the stage in our budget process, we wanted to open it up to the board to discuss the potential canceling of the COW. So with that, Chris, do you have anything to add to that?
As far as staff reporting, we do not have anything that we have to be discussed after the December.
So I'll open it up if anyone has any comments or anyone is really hoping to get together for December 15th. Okay, we have direction to cancel December 15th. With that, may I have a motion to adjourn?
Document.
Okay, everyone, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.